Encounter is brought to you by the Broome County Council of Churches, where we connect compassion with needs as we inspire growth with dignity. You'll find us in special places throughout the community. For those who remain hungry, we provide meals. For those who are challenged, we build wheelchair ramps. We comfort those who are ill, minister to those who are confined, and we remain an advocate for change and understanding on behalf of every element of our community. Connect and inspire. Encounter the Broome County Council of Churches.
Welcome. We are on the Encounter program. My name is Reverend Rachel Helgeson. I'm the pastor at Northminster Presbyterian Church. And I'm really deeply, humbly honored to have this particular show for you today. We had programmed something else and decided your team from Encounter program through the Broome County Council of Churches said we need to have some honest conversations in our community of faith. And I've had the honor to meet these two women through different things. They are not only intelligent, they have their pulse on things, and they are so human and have huge hearts in a way that I'm excited that you'll get to hear from them. And I will be learning alongside you and listening to what they have to say to you. So our first guest is Monica N. Majors. She is the IDEA consultant, IDEA consultant. I probably got that almost right. And then Sharon Bryant, PhD. And so, ladies, I am so glad that you are here with us today. And this week has been a tough one. Not that this is like totally different than all the things that have happened, but this particular week, I think, has brought things to reality for the rest of the world. That's been sort of turning their heads maybe the other way. So I'm just sort of wondering, how are you doing? Let's start there. How are you both doing?
Well, it's been a difficult week. I think that all of us can say one of the highlights was last Friday. Some of our colleagues, other women of color, came together last Friday to be in conversation with each other. And I think that was helpful because just in this time of COVID, although we are connected through Zoom, we're still like in our own homes, kind of isolated. And being in community was something that I think all of us needed just to be able to hear our voices being echoed.
Agreed. I was in that meeting, and meeting of the mind and meeting of the soul, right? To see yourself in someone else sometimes makes you feel better that you're not alone in how you're feeling. But attached more so to that is the realization that the language that I've been using to say I'm okay has been wrong. And so when you ask how are we doing, I don't yet have the words nor the sophisticated language to tell you how I'm doing. But if I were to make a mashup, it would be I'm optimistic and hopeful, yet grieved and saddened, right? And so however those four things can exist together, that is how I am doing. And I hope to move more towards the optimism and the hope as days go by and changes happen in our world.
I think as someone who's a person of faith, I think that all those things can coexist at the same time. I don't think they have to be separated out, and they're authentic. So that makes a lot of sense to me. I'm glad you didn't try to simplify that. I'm also sort of, for some of our viewership, they're hearing different things about what's going on, particularly in the Binghamton area, Southern Tier, and a lot of questions about, okay, so something terrible happened. Who and what is Black Lives Matter? What does that even mean? And I know that both of you have a perspective on this to be able to say, this is what it's about, this is what is going on. And I'd love to hear a little bit more, if you could unpack that for our viewership.
So if you've never heard of Black Lives Matter or BLM, or if you're on social media, hashtag BLM, what you should know is that Black Lives Matter is a reactionary movement to something that as the Black community we have seen and experienced for our time in this country, right? That living in a body that is Black or brown automatically means you're more likely to have your life devalued, whether that's through death or dismissal or lack of opportunity. And so in 2013, almost 7 years ago, three founders who I proudly say are all women of color came together and said in a protest of Trayvon Martin's death that Black Lives Matter, right? We need to pay attention to the fact that there is a disproportionate of deaths due to police brutality of Black lives. People who live in Black bodies have a higher likelihood of being killed by police than those who do not. And so historically, that's where we sit. How Black Lives Matter has evolved changes depending on where you are and where we are in history over the past 7 years. But the message that has remained the same is that we must protect the lives that are, at this point in time, statistically more likely to be attacked and taken away, right? And those are Black lives. And so in this current moment, you're hearing it often because of the murder of three people very close together that has been publicized. One of which was Ahmaud Arbery, the other George Floyd, and Breonna, who you would not see a video of, right? It's a record that we have. And in those three pieces, we see the immediate cause of, I would say, the higher visibility, right, of the Black Lives Matter movement, which is a call for multiple things, right? Right now and here, it is about reform of the systematic elements that make it so that we have to say Black Lives Matter. So in the policing and whatnot, but it spans economics, education. But what we're trying to get to is protecting the Black bodies that walk through the United States, although it's an international movement.
Right. And the three incidences that you talked about from this past month, particularly this week too, they are national, right? They're not just all in one place.
Right. They're throughout. So one was in Minneapolis, one was in Georgia. So it is not that this is a unique situation that we can put a geographic location. It is not the pulse of a particular city or area, right? Like we could call places red and blue and all those other things. That's not really what's going on here. It really is a systemic thing that we're seeing, and the evidence of that is that it's happening everywhere and frequently enough that we have to have a movement for it, right? These are not isolated incidences.
Right. I know that I even took a little bit of a double take. You think of Georgia being more conservative, even if Atlanta is a city and more urban with diversity, you don't really think about Georgia being, you think about, I don't know, I think about the Deep South, honestly.
Mm-hmm.
And while Minnesota is more of a white state, I think about the Twin Cities being a little bit more progressive.
Right.
And so it was news to me to hear that there had been a long time record, particularly with this particular police officer, and that the other police officers had sort of looked backwards, and that other folks had sort of buried it. There certainly is work now to do and be different, but that's not. There's a lot of work to be done, and now this has come to the limelight that there were a lot of things that had just been hidden, or said that somebody else is saying this without reality. So, go ahead.
I guess I would also say, this coming along with us being in quarantine with COVID, and the message started with, we're all in this together, that everyone has an equal chance of acquiring the virus, until we got to the point of being able to analyze the data, which I kind of wonder why we thought we would all be in here together when we know we have a history of, one of the statements they always say is that when the white population has a cold, the Black population has the flu. So we had been hearing that for years, but I think, all across the country, Even in our own community, COVID has been disproportionately, people of color have bared the burden of becoming ill and dying. And I think on top of the number of deaths in our own community, seeing the totality of deaths across the country, and just trying to imagine it. When I saw that cover of the New York Times that listed everyone's name, you know, it just caused you to pause to think of all of the people, families lost in a time that we can't celebrate their homecoming in the way that we normally have our rituals. And then on top of this, these senseless killings over minor items, you know, that you might have had a counterfeit 20. I mean, all of us have gone to pay for something with $20 and have seen them check your 20. But if, you know, mine was fraudulent, I wouldn't have known where I had gotten it from. To the fact that you can't run in your own community. One of the things in where I grew up in a community that everybody had fences. And now I live in a community where very few people have fences. And so people walk through my backyard oftentimes. It's mostly white people walking through my backyard. And when I'm at my kitchen window washing dishes or whatever, I'm always startled that somebody has, you know, walked through my backyard. But it's a shortcut to between two streets. But I've never allowed my own Black male child do that, because I you know, in the back of my mind, I can't give him the freedom to run through people's backyard, because I'm wondering, is somebody going to call the police on my child? Is somebody going to shoot my child? I think that not see him as an innocent person passing through. Just like Monica said, the constraints that are on our Black bodies cause us to, the stress of living in this Black body is part of the reason for our health disparities, that we're never able to get a break. We're always conscious of what somebody is seeing when we're out in public.
And it's true. I mean, they say that the science behind this, stress causes more health issues, right? And if you're constantly on alert, you're going to be more susceptible to health issues. And I mean, and I think I almost heard you say, but didn't quite say, is that disproportionately right now, we know that the Black African-American community has been hit by COVID much harder than the white community. That is a fact. There are numbers to support that. And if you're interested in that, I can find that for you, so you can hear it. But there, for instance, one of my classmates at seminary, both her sisters lived in New York City, and Amariah is African American, and both of her sisters died of COVID, whereas my own cousin had symptoms and is fine. So there is even privilege in how we get cared for, which is problematic in itself. And so, and I was, as you were talking about your son, I was thinking about my son. This morning he was walking out. He's in a yard, and I was trying to pull him back, but I didn't have to worry about that, and I didn't have to. And that's in itself something that breaks my heart, that every child should be able to just walk on the grass.
Yeah, and you want, my friends have heard me say this, that I want my son to go out into the world boldly and fearless. But he has not had an idyllic childhood. He's 15 now. And when he was in kindergarten, I had to tell him about Trayvon Martin, about, we had to talk about, don't wear a hoodie, don't wear your hoodie with the hood up in public, and when at the same time we're reading story tales, like he and I are going to the library, coming out with bags on bags of stories, of beautiful, wonderful stories, and his mother is talking to him about the realities of being in a Black body. And I can remember in first grade, he told me, my teacher said, it's okay to make a mistake because we learn from mistakes. And I just couldn't let that idealism in. I said, yes, Ibni, I do want to believe that, yes, you can make mistakes, but I also want you to know you're in a Black body. You can make a mistake. You might be in jail. You might be killed. So while, yes, you can learn from mistakes, but I want you to really think through the decisions you make so that you make fewer mistakes. And I mean, why, as a mother, why should I have to be talking to a first grader about the seriousness of living in a Black body when he should be watching cartoons and thinking, yes, I can make all the mistakes I want. I learn my lessons and I move on.
So friends, if you're just joining us, this is the Encounter Program. I'm Reverend Rachel Helgeson, and today I get to talk with some wonderful guests, Monica and Majors and Sharon Bryant, and we are unpacking a little bit from their perspectives about what's been going on in the world, particularly as we consider this week. Your Encounter Program folks felt this was really important, that we shift gears to hear and to listen. And so I hope that you can continue to listen with open ears about perspective and what is going on in our broader world, but also here in our own Southern Tier region. So that's one of the things I would like to shift a little bit to, is two parts of it. A lot of our folks who are listening in or who are watching are people of faith, and from a broad spectrum of faith. And so I'm wondering, first off, how you think that faith communities and people of faith can be responding during this time. And then secondly, particularly in our own region, in the Southern Tier, what are things that they should be thinking about or be aware about?
So I'll start, and I'll give a little bit of my positionality from which I speak, because I do not speak for the whole, but I do speak for myself and for others. I am the daughter of a pastor. My mother's a pastor. Growing up, my father was a deacon and the minister of music, so I have grown up in church. My higher education experience reinforce the intersection of social justice and doing God's work. So I'm Christian, but I attended a Catholic HBCU. So if you're unfamiliar with what an HBCU is, it's a historically Black college university. And I attended Xavier University of Louisiana. And part of the reason I did it was they were great at educating African Americans in the field of study that I wished to pursue at the time. But in addition to that, there was a connection to what we need to do for others, right? And so again, coming as a preacher's kid, one of my favorite books of the Bible is James, right? And so it informs how I move. And so I call upon faith communities to understand that the foundations of our faith are attached to social justice, right? And not necessarily for us to come in and say that there's a stark difference between right and wrong. But I think that the message that we get throughout our faith is to love, and not always the romantic love, right? But like that agape love. And so as we call on communities of faith, I would say that responding is a very introspective experience. And it is one in which you must call upon your God, your creator, your father, however you identify him. And you must begin to ask him, what should I do, right? Like, we have to be led by the Spirit, because there's no answer, right, to how to cast out darkness, but to be light. But how are you to be light, right? And all of us are gifted in different ways to do that. So my call to individuals in the faith community, right, would to be to sit with yourself and with your maker and begin to say, hey, I need some help. In the Christian faith, there's one of my favorite scriptures and one of my favorite prayers is, if you wish to, paraphrasing, if you wish to have wisdom, ask and he will give it to you, right? And so if you want to know within your heart what to do, right, ask. If you don't feel like there's anything you should do, if this does not pull at your heartstrings, you should still ask, what is the condition of my heart that I see my brother and my sister, another human being who I've been taught is connected to me, and I feel no sympathy, no compassion, no need to change. I look at the life of Jesus and say he was a revolutionary. And so with that, if we are to follow after him, we don't have to live our lives maybe as a revolutionary, but we have to have revolutionary love for each other. And that sometimes means being uncomfortable. So I do not have the answers for what communities of faith should do on an individual level. On a larger level, we can look at the history of the Protestant faith, right? And understand how we were founded and how we're supposed to move through the spiritual and the natural, because they overlap so much in the work that we do. And then in addition to that, understanding the Black community, the civil rights movement and the work of social justice was critical to the development of that church.
Well, a lot of times folks forget that Martin Luther King was a pastor. He trained under Thurman. So he was theologically minded and socially justice minded. A lot of times when I have seen biographies about him, that part is usually cut out, that he was living out his faith.
Yes, through the work that he did. So yeah, so if you want to fall in line with Martin Luther King, the first contention I have is that Martin Luther King would be a supporter of Black Lives Matter, because the foundational beliefs. But as a larger unit and entity, and as a member of that entity, I must say, first of all, the distinction we have within our groups has to kind of take a backseat to the fact that there is action that must be taken to bring forth, right, the world in which we were promised and that we became disciples to create, right? So do I have an answer for how to do it? No, but the intention must be there.
And I think, the whole notion of liberation theology, the ways in which the Bible and the scriptures and religion was used to hold people in place, to enslave people, and the ways in which those same scriptures have led us to a liberation of those same individuals. And the fact that Jesus, his whole mission and focus of his service was to the disenfranchised. Mm-hmm. And for us to really look and see in our own communities who those groups are, and to work in order to examine the systemic ways that have led people to be stuck within those larger institutions and unable to move forward. And the faith community definitely has a role. I grew up in the church, and that has really colored my perspective moving forward. But I do like what Monica says. Not all of us should be marching. Not all of us should be letter writing. But for you to sit within yourself and whatever gift, I can't remember the exact scriptures, but it talks about all of the talents that we have, that when we all come together, we are a powerful group. And I think that is called for at this moment too, to really examine what you have, what is your strength, what is your gift, and use that to move forward.
May I jump back in very quickly?
Great.
For those who are from the community being affected, you know, Black people, and for those that are outside of that community but connected, I want I think one of a lot of Christians' favorite scripture, one that I hear preached often is, "For I have not given you the spirit of fear, but of power, love, and a sound mind." The work that has to be done is not comfortable. Sometimes it can be scary because it's uncertain and unknown and you don't know where it's going. But I would challenge you to call upon that scripture and that knowledge that even in times of uncertainty, that he is with you and we are doing his work and he will empower us. As Sharon said, and as I said, you don't have to do everything, right? Like you don't have to go march. Are you, compromised and COVID's out? Don't go protest. Be wise. You know, don't go protest. But we all do have gifts, and taking a step back on an institutional level. So part of the consultancy work I do is in organizational change, right? And strategic planning and especially attached to diversity issues. And one thing that I find a lot of organizations fail to do, including the larger faith community and church, is having a unified goal and objective. Have we had conversations about what we want and what we want it to look like? Do we have our ask, right? And I think as a community, right, even if we go to the meso level, right, like within the Southern Tier, within Broome County, within your church, what place do you see that entity having in this movement? It could be, oh, we provide shelter and snacks for protesters. You don't want to protest? That's fine. And so to say that we have to act, we have to be purposeful, and we have to be deliberate. And I think we're even taught that in prayer, right? You put your petitions to the Lord. So when we petition, we usually have something we're asking for. So if I were to say to the larger church, conversations must be had about what we want, and everyone must be included in those conversations, both those who are disenfranchised and those who are privileged. And then as we meet in that place, I think that it will be easier to develop strategy on how and where to move.
Yeah. Okay. So God bless you. Thank you, WBNG. Thank you for our radio stations. And thank you, Monica and Sharon, for being on with me today and illuminating us and helping us see how God is in the midst